EQD. Are you here? Yes, you are. Going to talk about shellfish harvesting and water quality. Thank you for coming today. Please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Waterways Commission. My name is Betsy Durling. I'm an environmental scientist with Environmental Quality Division. I work with John Flo and Melissa Long. That's it. And so I just... This is an informational presentation today. We have been monitoring the closed shellfish harvesting areas in Duval County for a little over a year now. And the water quality is looking really good. We are surprised and pleased so far with what we're seeing. And I'm going to show you the data in just a couple of minutes. But I thought I would start with just a little bit of history and background. There's probably some new members here, and maybe you've forgotten. I was here about 2 years ago. So I thought I would start with that. The Duval County shellfish areas were classified as prohibited in 1996, so they've been closed for almost 20 years now. For a number of years before that, they had been somewhat marginal, very difficult to manage because there would require frequent closings when water quality declined. So here's what some of our oyster beds look like. As you'll remember, oysters filter a lot of water, about 400 gallons a day, so they concentrate pathogens and contaminants. So that's why it's so critical that water quality is very good in the oyster beds to allow harvesting. So these are the areas we're talking about. Big part of the Intercoastal Waterway.
You don't have it under
North of the river, north of Fort George River. All of Fort George River is included, and Nassau Sound and Simpson and Myrtle Creeks. It encompasses about over 3,000 acres. Here's some more pretty pictures of the area. So, of course, there's been a lot of concern about the closing and interest in trying to reopen the harvesting areas. The Waterways Commission has been concerned for many years. In 2010, Commissioner Scott Shine chaired the Shellfish Harvesting Subcommittee. He was working with Dr. David Heel with DACS, Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services at the time. Another big participant in this committee was my predecessor, Dana Morton, who's since moved on. So the big question has always been water quality. Has the water quality improved? We can't do anything without knowing that. So the Commission asked us to estimate the cost of a preliminary study, not a full-blown study, which would be done by DACS, but a preliminary study to see if water quality has improved. So we came up with an estimate of $235,440 for a preliminary study to look at water quality. This would be a 2-year study. This was based on a combination of contracted services, and of course there was no funding identified. Also, Commissioner Pringle is very familiar with, very knowledgeable about the shellfish regulations, and he's spoken with some of the people also at DACS. So I won't give you a whole lot of details about these next few slides. You have them in your handouts. Everybody should have 2 handouts, by the way. Is that right?
Maybe not. They're coming around now.
One handout is just a copy of the slides I'm presenting, and another handout has some blow-ups of some of the slides. But the point of some of these slides now is that the industry is highly regulated, both by DACS and other agencies. The Shellfish Environmental Assessment Section, or SEAS, is responsible for classifying and managing the shellfish harvesting areas, and a comprehensive shellfish harvesting area survey is always conducted. So Florida uses standards established by the National Shellfish Sanitation Program, and many factors influence the water quality.
What slide are you on now?
I'm on, well, for me it's page 8, so I think it would be page 4 possibly.
Okay, got it.
But anyway, the primary influence of water quality is rainfall, high amounts of rainfall. Oops, I'm sorry. So management plans are developed for each area using recent data. All kinds of various factors go into these management plans. So we wanted to also look at some of these factors in our monitoring, not just bacteria levels, but some of these other factors as well that influence water quality. And when you have harvesting areas, they are classified in various ways. Most areas now are most areas in Florida are conditionally approved, meaning if water quality is good, they are open, but following rainfall events or some other management criteria, they are temporarily closed until water quality improves. So there are two standards. I'm going to talk about those in just a moment that apply to conditionally approved or approved shellfish areas. And once again, the conditionally approved areas are the most prominent in Florida. So that's kind of a quick summary of some of the background and the stringent regulation of the harvesting areas. Well, Environmental Quality Division still felt that that we were responsible for monitoring these areas to look at the current water quality to see if there had been a change in the last 20 years. So we did decide to do a preliminary assessment. We had no funding. We didn't have the $235,440, but we decided to try to do it anyway with existing staff, volunteers, our existing boats and equipment, and our laboratory analysis. We're doing a 2-year study. We are not sampling every other month, but we're sampling once a month. So we're doing about half of that preliminary estimate that we estimated a couple years ago. And as I said, we wanted to sample in all kinds of conditions, adverse environmental conditions, various weather, rainfall, tidal events, warm and cool weather, seasons, all those different conditions. So we began sampling in December of 2013. We have a small draft boat shown here and a lot of volunteers. We've had great volunteers, and we have a fantastic boat captain. And we have learned so much in the last year. It's really been amazing. Some of our volunteers are from the Timucuan Preserve, the National Park Service staff, because all of these harvesting areas are within the Timucuan Preserve. So they also are extremely interested in this issue. Here's some oysters exposed at low tide. At high tide, all these oysters will be submerged, so you would never know they're even there at high tide.
And where are these located?
These, I believe, are in the Intercoastal Waterway on one of the eastern sites. If you look at your second handout, it does show a map of all the sites that we're monitoring, the 30 sites. I'm sorry, what was that?
Right down Hector. Okay, thank you.
Here's some more pictures of some oysters and the areas that we're sampling. And I mentioned we're trying to sample at varying water levels and tidal conditions. So this is at high water. It was really flood conditions. Most of this grass is generally exposed. And then low water conditions. We sample in all weather also. Here's a nice warm sunny day. We see a lot of kayaks out in the summer months around Simpson Creek primarily. A lot of fishermen. We've learned so much about everything out there, about all the sandbars and mud flats and the oyster beds, and when we see dolphins. And we also sample on really wet, cold days, and we're in an open boat, so we get so cold and so hot and so wet, but it's a lot of fun. These are happy samplers. So we've got seasonal data, and as I said, we sample, in addition to the bacteria levels, which is the primary parameter, we do collect meter data for dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, conductivity, salinity, and we collect weather data and tidal condition information. So again, here are the 30 sample sites on your handout. These sites were actually sampled by DACS, by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, in the last comprehensive shellfish harvesting area survey that they conducted. So these were sampled in 1987, and again, I think about 10 years after that. So there is a site all the way down into the St. Johns River where it connects with the Intercoastal Waterway, all the way out into Fort George Inlet and up into Nassau Sound. So the samples are all submitted to the city's Environmental Quality Division laboratory for analysis. And Florida uses the National Shellfish Sanitation Program standards, and there's actually 2 different standards depending on the method used for analysis. In most of Florida, the Apalachicola lab uses the MPN number, so they would use a 1443 standard, but our lab uses a membrane filtration number, so we use the 1431 standard. So keep those numbers in mind, a 1431 standard. And so that standard has 2 parts. The 14 means that the geometric mean or median of samples must not exceed 14, and then not more than 10% of samples may exceed 31. So we're going to look at data now. If you look at the second page in your handout, so you've got the actual raw data. If anybody wants to look at all the raw data, this is it. And along the left-hand column are the 30 sites listed. They're all numbered sites. And along the top are the different monthly dates that we sampled. And so then to the right, we've calculated the geometric mean and the median for each site based on that available data. For some sites, for most sites, there are 14 data points. For some, there's a little fewer than that. And then we calculated the percent of those samples that exceed 31. So here's the first graph of the fecal coliform geometric mean. So you can see where the standard is up at 14. So all of the sites are less than the standard. Yay, that's fantastic news. We were shocked. Because when you look back at the raw data, you do see some violations of that standard of 14. So we were worried the first couple of months, but we just kept sampling. And that geometric mean is really looking good. And we also calculated the mean. That was the geometric mean. We also looked at the median, which is very similar numbers, but we wanted to calculate both of those. And again, everything is below the 14. And so then we calculated the percent of samples that exceed 31. So out of those 14 data points, what percent of individual samples exceed 31? There's only one site number 161, that exceeds that number more than 10% of the time. That happens to be at Horseshoe Creek. There's a little boat ramp there. There's also a lot of birds roosting there, so we don't really know why those samples are higher at this point. So we also talked to some personnel at the state with DAX, and they also, we've sent them all of our data. I'll talk about that in a second. But they also wanted to have us calculate the geometric mean by date. So this is data seasonally. So that 1 month in January, there were samples that exceeded 14 and resulted in a geometric mean higher than 14. So just another way of looking at the data.
Councilman Crescent-Benny has a question for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm having flashbacks to my high school math classes, and they're not good ones. But I do have a question for the speaker. The chart on this chart right here.
Of the raw data?
Yeah, the raw data, not the steamed data. Huh, get it? The left-hand column.
Yes, sir.
What's the order that those sites are listed in?
I'm sorry, I did not put them in numerical order. I apologize.
So there's no rhyme or reason for that order?
Well, the rhyme or reason is that these are actually the order that we collect them in, but for you guys,
I was curious.
Yeah.
And then my other question was flipping over to the next page. That's the let's see, actually the next two slides,
Okay.
the median and the mean,
Yes.
mean and the median. It looks like sites 155, 159, and 160 and 170 are
Right.
the problem sites, and they all seem to be like in the same area.
Right. Yes.
So what's going on right there between, is there some sort of upland problem that's contributing, or?
Well, it's possible. That is Black Hammock Island. There are not a lot of residences there that I'm aware of. There is a little boat ramp. There are a lot of roosting birds, but we see them all over. So as far as the pollution sources, we have not investigated that fully yet.
I mean, doesn't that raise a red flag?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
that especially 150, 161, 159, and 155, I mean, they're all just right there.
Right.
Off Sisters Creek. I mean, I would think that would be, and it's not like they're marginally above the other sites. I mean, they're significantly above.
They are above the other sites.
So I'm just wondering, is that like, I mean, are we looking at a
But they are
failing septic tank
Well, they
problem,
are still way below the standard. Well, they're still below the standard, though, too. So
because they're below the standard, we're not going to pursue.
Oh, we'll investigate. What we're doing now, though, is trying to collect the water quality data and present it to DAX. There'll be a lot more work done, let's put it this way,
Okay.
to determine, because they would not necessarily have to reopen all of these beds. We could break it up into smaller areas and reopen portions of beds, or even some that we're not monitoring possibly.
Okay. Well, those were my questions. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Pringle.
Thank you, through the chair. I was had been involved in some of the area right there. There's a lot of excuse me. There's a lot of pigs, wild wild feral pigs in that area. They get around in the salt flats, do a lot of rooting and do a lot of messing, and that's one of the major problems. I had chatted with some of the people from state about that, and had told them that they need to clear out a lot of those feral pigs. But anyway, that's one of the problems that I know of.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
Just an adjunct to Mr. Pringle, my question was, what was the source of the fecal coliform? And obviously, it's not just humans, there are other sources.
That's right. I'm sorry. It's not, it's
And
all.
the only way that you can actually differentiate them is to go through a genetic screening. And
Correct.
that's very expensive.
More money. All right. Any other questions? All right. Continue on.
Okay. So we have sent all of this data to the state, to the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Division of Aquaculture. And unfortunately, the people that we were talking to several years ago are no longer there. Dr. David Heil and Chris Brooks are no longer with DAX, and those were the folks we were talking with several years ago. Jillian Flieger is the environmental administrator, and Portia Sapp is the bureau chief. And I have spoken with Jillian on the phone, and we had a conversation in March, and here are some of the comments from that conversation. Of course, she mentioned that there are multiple requests throughout the state to look at shellfish areas for reclassification, which is what we're basically doing. And they have to prioritize their resources just like everyone does. But she was very interested in our data, very excited to know that we're monitoring this area. She said that they do review each area about every 10 to 12 years, and she thought that the next survey in our area was due around 2018, and she mentioned that it was possible it could be moved up somewhat. So I think the more calls, the more interest that she sees from our area, the better that would be. So I've been focused on water quality this whole time because that has to be the first step, the first thing that we look at. But she did mention that a big concern also is just how much resource do we have? How many oysters are actually out there? If they were harvested, how fast would they repopulate? Would we really have a productive, sustainable oyster harvesting area? So she asked, she talked about resource data and research that could possibly be done, and I mentioned that I knew there was some research in this area already about oyster health, and I have sent her some of those research reports so far. There's one being done by Dr. Dean Grubbs from FSU in conjunction with the Timucuan Preserve on population and community dynamics and on oyster reefs. He's looking at 3 different areas, one of which is the Timucuan Preserve. He's looking at Pumpkin Hill Creek and Clapboard Creek. So they are in, I think, the 3rd year of that study. And they're specifically looking at how oysters repopulate, how they, their recruitment rate, their growth, and their survivorship. And then there's some more research that is planned. Andrea Small is with the Northern Coastal Basin Aquatic Preserve, and they have just received a grant to study oyster health in the whole region. They're going to look at 100 reefs, I believe, and set out some data sondes and again look at oyster health. They're going to look at percent cover of live oysters, oyster density, oyster size class distribution, and that's going to cover a year. And she also mentioned the oyster mapping efforts being conducted by the St. Johns River Water Management District and the University of Central Florida. So there is some work going on as far as oyster health and the health of the resource. But Jillian also talked about, again, if a wild harvest is viable, would there be both commercial and recreational harvesting, and would the commercial harvesting eliminate a good portion of that resource? How fast would our oysters regrow? The commercial harvesting has a 20-bag limit, is what she said. So that would be a wild harvest. There also could be leases, although she said that there are not very many leases in Florida now. Back in 1994, there were 8 in our area. So she asked me if we would continue to monitor, and I said yes. We wanted to get at least 2 full years of data. So I think we should ask for her to come visit and discuss everything with us at some point. She also asked if I knew Janie Thomas. So Janie Thomas with the Shrimpers Association has been in touch with her as well. So what we're going to do in the Environmental Quality Division is, like I said, continue to monitor so we have at least 2 years of water quality data. That's our expertise. Continue to inquire about any additional studies that may be ongoing about oyster health. Continue discussions with DACS and other agencies. The National Park Service, like I mentioned, is very interested. Water Management District, DEP, I think all the agencies are. And lobby for a prompt, comprehensive shellfish harvesting area survey. That is what has to be done before we can even think of reopening the shellfish beds. So that pretty much covers my information.
All right, do we have any questions? Commissioner Pringle, saw you first, and then Commissioner Hodges. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for the presentation. It's near and dear to my heart. I've represented the industry for several years, and one of the things that's vital in our waterways is the health of any of the crustaceans or the shellfish. It's something that's very, very important, and as Councilman Crescembeni looked and saw that there was a problem in one area, the only reason you know that is because you check the oyster. The oyster is the one that filters everything that goes through the water. They're a filtering system, and it's something that is very vital. I know I chatted with the Commissioner of Agriculture here just recently. Commissioner Putnam had said that he's very interested in this oyster industry, and the oysters are getting in trouble because there's not enough of them anymore. People are consuming them faster than they can be presented on the menus in the restaurants. Of course, one of the things that's very important is Governor Scott has issued some different leases to do oysters. They've actually are growing them on rods, and they have water column leases that they're growing oysters. And if you do the relay, what you do is you have the oyster clutches. You take the old oyster shell and put it back in the oyster bed, and it actually grows oysters, and they can grow, and it's not that big of a deal if you do it right and proper, which DAX has been doing in Apalachicola for a very long time. You can go there, and the only mountain that's in Apalachicola is a mountain of oyster shells. But it's something that I was a member of the National Sanitation Committee, and it's something that's vital to the industry, and I'd like to see this go forward and even have leases that people can go out and do farming with the aquaculture. And I think that the Waterways Commission should be very involved in this, because it is the health and welfare of our water system. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything that I can do, I would love to be involved in it and chatting with these folks. I'd hated to see these other folks go because they were good friends of mine, but it's always, we can make better acquaintances and get involved in this more and more, and anything that I can do, I would love to be involved in. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pringle. Commissioner Hodges, did you have a question?
Really a comment. I'd like to applaud the efforts of the Environmental Quality Division. I recall a year or so ago when they volunteered to take forth this project, and it looks like they've done just as they committed that they would do, and that doesn't seem to always happen, and I appreciate that you're going to continue it for another year or so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, too.
Oh, yeah. Councilman Crescenbenny?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I want to echo what Commissioner Hodges said. This is an amazing effort, and this is going to continue until when?
We started in December of 2013, so we would like to have at least 2 full years of data. We missed 1 month in February. So we have another big project coming up. We're hoping we can continue this, though, for 2 full years.
And all this data is collected on a single day, is that right?
Yes,
And
that's
on the
correct.
days that there's some data missing, what happened on those
Well,
days?
we were
That
just
weather?
getting started. We ran into a lot of sandbars and mudflats, and we also ran into some big storms. We just had to cut the day short.
Okay.
So we do have missing data.
And when you go out and do these samples, I was looking at these pictures. I mean, you have like a full crew of people. Do all these people go out every time there's a sampling day?
We, believe it or not, I thought I might have trouble getting volunteers, but the opposite is true. I have too many people that want to get on this small boat. The maximum for safety reasons and just for moving around is 5 people. So we frequently have 5 people on that boat, sometimes 3. And there's various things to do. We're scooping up the sample. We have one person who is just the boat captain for safety reasons, and he simply runs the boat. Then we have somebody collecting the water sample, somebody running the meter, and somebody collecting the weather information, and maybe one other person writing everything down.
How long does it take? All day?
It's a full day.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested in volunteering, although
Yay.
I'd like something in between this cold, wet day and the hot summer day.
You don't want the extremes?
If you could arrange that and let me know, I'd be more than happy to. You probably won't let me captain the boat, so I guess I could do the weather.
You could scoop out the water. Commissioner Swan, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Through the chair. Just out of curiosity, I know, and this is kind of anecdotal, when I was a kid, I know oysters weren't as abundant there as they are now, and fishing wasn't as good as it is now. Do you think there's any kind of relationship between oyster abundance and water quality and fish stocks in that area?
I do, just like you say, anecdotally. Well, we know that oysters clean the water, and that's one thing that the Timaquan Park Service people are interested in knowing is, yes, they want the oysters there, and they want water quality to be good so that people can harvest oysters recreationally, but they also feel like it's going to continue to improve the water quality itself, and hopefully the habitats, the fisheries habitats as well. So I don't know what Dr. White might know about that, but.
Thanks.
Dr. White, you have a question?
Ms. Darling shared this data with me last month, and this is exciting, and I'm really proud of her. She's done a great job. I will comment that we just finished, one of my graduate students just finished a study in the same area looking at recruitment for spats, which is the juvenile oyster, and did it in 3 creeks, Pumpkin Creek, Sisters Creek, and Clapboard Creek. It's sort of an interesting phenomena. We also did a GIS study in which we used photographs going back to 1943, which was the earliest aerial photos we could find, and doing something called geosyncing, was able to then map the physical changes that have occurred in these areas. As you might imagine, Clapboard Creek and Pumpkin Hill Creek least impacted. Sisters Creek, as the intercoastal waterway, heavily impacted, dredging, channelization, shorting out, and so pretty interesting sort of results. Showed some decreasing in areas, in some areas, but accretion in other areas. In terms of the spat settlement, we share the same concerns that the state has got in terms of what's going on with the recruitment and what potential is. Interestingly enough, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but effectively Pumpkin Hill Creek had an abundance of oyster spats and heavy settling potential. Clapboard Creek, not so much so, and Sisters Creek, very, very low. And so the potential for oyster regeneration in those areas, Sisters Creek in particular, partly because of the boat traffic, and there is a direct correlation between water quality and oyster beds, and also a correlation between fish harvesting and fish landings and oyster landings. So the healthier your oyster beds, the better your fishing is. So this is a very, very complex system, and is going to warrant a lot more work. I'm currently working with some folks that have a drone, and we're trying to figure out whether or not we can actually use the drone to map the oyster beds at low tide. One of the problems you've got is when you want to go look at these areas is low tide, and I think, as Ms. Sterling has discovered, that becomes the most difficult time to get your boats in and out and around. So if we could do a drone, we can actually fly over and map the oyster beds and then begin to assess what we've got going on in those creek systems. So a lot of work left to do, and we'll continue working with them. But like I said, we had a pretty good study last year looking at the spat settlement in these areas. So I'll get Betsy a copy of that work, by the way.
Great.
So.
Thank you, Dr. White. Representative Ray, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would like to thank you for the good work. It's quite informative, and I think it gives us, as we've been discussing, a nice picture of where we are. Now for the amateur question. How long does it take for an oyster to grow to maturity for harvesting?
Harvesting? In some areas, it's 2 years.
3?
3 years, 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. Depends on if they're steamed or raw.
Okay, Commissioner Pringle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One other thing is really good in a lot of the areas that they do harvest oysters, they have what they call a relay, and during the off season they take oysters that are in water that is polluted and they take them into clean water, and that they leave them in that clean water, and they actually filter themselves out to make them harvestable oysters also. So they can be relayed and made harvestable, and that's a good thing too.
Okay, any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for coming today and enlightening us, and hopefully we'll be harvesting some oysters here pretty soon.
I hope so.
In
Thank
a
you.
proper manner. Yeah, bring samples, that's
Okay.
right. Thank you.
Have an oyster roast.
There you go. Okay, moving forward, we have Ms.